Hi, everybody. Welcome to the third edition of Upstream Ag Insights for the week of January 23rd, 2022. And so today, going to keep things relatively similar to how they were last week. Going to touch on a few different areas of upstream in one video specifically. Next week, I'm going to try something a little different where I create one separate video for each specific topic. So they might only be anywhere from 2 to 7 minutes per video, but there'll be, 2 to 4 of them, something like that, depending on the topics that I think might be interesting. And so you can watch whichever one might be of interest to you instead of having to watch the entirety of the video where you might just want to see one specific aspect. Hopefully this will make it a little simpler. So I'm going to try that out next week, but for this week, keeping things pretty consistent. So we're going to touch on three different areas today. So one is the Eigen Raise, two is ZeroSum Thinking in agriculture, and then three is Suspending in investor disbelief, which is an article written by Matthew Pryor. And so we'll touch first on the Eigen Raise. And so Eigen raised $4 million in a seed round from the likes of AgFunder. They're a small autonomous solar-powered robotic weeding company. You can see the image pictured here, pretty small, so manages compaction, doesn't use chemical, uses mechanical weeding mechanisms. Kind of an interesting robot. Right now, it seems to me they're focusing specifically in sugar beets, and so we'll get a little bit into that. But right now, as of today, one unit can do about 3 acres of weeding per day, and so when you start to actually break that down, it's not very much. When if you have a 90-acre sugar beet field, all of a sudden you're having to if you have one unit in there, you're taking about 30 days to actually weed that field, and so you have a crop like sugar beets, which is actually pretty uncompetitive or pretty sensitive to weeds that are around it. I think I was looking some specific numbers up, and if you have one barnyard grass per 10 feet of row, you can actually lose 5 to 15% yield, and so all of a sudden you have lower yield, but then even you get into some of the quality parameters like extractable sugar that can cause reductions, and so all of a sudden you need to probably have two if not three of these so that you can actually manage that weed free period in a much tighter time frame. So all of a sudden, having one of these units in a field can be beneficial, but you need to have three, and they don't have an actual business model yet. They're still seed round. I suspect they're going to do something on a per unit per month or per unit per year costing to the farmer. And so all of a sudden, if you need to have three of these in the field, but it's only for your sugar beets, then you still need to have your other assets for, ground rig spraying. So you need your full John Deere case sprayer, whatever you use on top. So this is now another cost on top of your current capital needs and those sorts of things. And so all of a sudden gets to be a little bit interesting. And you can start to argue, well, there's also going to be a cutback in herbicide costing. And so I broke down some basic math this week where, if you take a typical sugar beet field, you probably have a pre-burn with some glyphosate at 360 grams an acre or a liter equivalent sort of thing, plus an add-in some sort of product with like a carfentrazone or group 14 with no residual, something like that in. And then you're going to go in and probably apply another couple applications of 360 grams per acre, something along those lines. So it's going to cost you something like $40 an acre, and so all of a sudden you're saving about $4,000 in herbicide costs, and so you can start to see what the kind of costing would need to be at least initially for the Eigen business model to work. And so that's kind of what I started to break down, and all of a sudden you probably need to look at this being a cost to a farmer of $1,500 per unit per year or per month, something along those lines, depending on how they're going to use it. There's the other option of potentially, I would call it tethering this to a larger unit where you still use your straight up ground rig sprayer for getting most of the weeds, using your glyphosate or whatever crop protection product you're using. And then you use this as having one unit in the field to get escapes, manage resistance, those sorts of things. So it can still have some fit for sure. I think where things start to get a little more interesting is all of a sudden you have this unit in a field that's continuously going up and down the field, up and down the rows. What other data can it capture? And so can you start to actually get disease information, weather information, insect information, even soil information, plant health information. And so now all of a sudden, when you start to think about this being in the field continuously, you start to be able to expand, okay, what sort of value proposition could this organization deliver to a farmer? And so that's where it probably gets interesting. But in the short term, they are going to have to deliver, I would say, pretty effectively on the weeding aspect. So they do have a ability in a sugar beet field to be able to see or differentiate a weed from the crop, and so it knows which green material or plants to be able to mechanically remove. So kind of interesting. Potential, you look at, there's a lot of autonomy in the OEM space. People are talking about autonomy for the large equipment. You have drones being done by a lot of these organizations. I could see the small robots being another future area where there's some acquisitions made, some interest from these large equipment manufacturers because of what I alluded to with the potential for removal of, or not removal of weeds, but sensing of all these other aspects when it comes to carbon and soil and all that. And I'll get to that more in a second here. But it even starts to bring up the question of, I've talked about this before with Syngenta and BASF and those sorts of organizations. I don't anticipate that all of a sudden in the next 10 or even 15 plus years that we're going to see just chemistry fall off the face of the earth by any means, but gets you wondering, do the traditional seed and chemistry manufacturers start to look at the robotic side of things? It's outside their core competency, but as you'll know from reading Upstream or reading other materials or listening to like Tim Hammerich's Future of Agriculture, there's talk about, hey, we're not a chemistry company if you're Syngenta, we're not a weed removal company, we're an innovation company, we're a solutions company. And so do some of those organizations begin to look at some of this? Could be a little bit challenging as well, of course. But what I do want to touch on is, for anybody that read the release of this Eigen Raise, it was quite crazy to me, in my opinion. Not once did they actually mention that they remove weeds. They talked about their vision for a carbon negative or a carbon neutral or carbon, I can't remember, but it was basically along the lines of, we're saving the planet with our robot. Everything was about carbon. Everything was about changing the face of the earth with farming and these robots. And it's good to have a vision. I get that. I think it's a little bit it was a little bit over the top and unnecessary the way they were focusing in on it, because at the end of the day, you can have that vision, but if they don't execute on removing weeds in a cost effective way for farmers, it doesn't matter what their vision is for reducing carbon emissions, for sequestering carbon in the soil, whatever. You need to actually do that one thing really, really well initially before getting to any of that. So it was kind of interesting. They mentioned carbon and soil health 4 times and 5 times each, but not once did they mention weed removal. So really, really strange release in my opinion, but guess that's what gets the attention of investors these days. So with that, move on to the second aspect, which is zero-sum thinking in agriculture. And for anybody that reads Upstream, probably have heard me talk about this and probably are familiar with it in general anyways. And so this is really just me kind of talking about some random musings, I would say, is the biggest thing. And so, what is zero-sum thinking? And it's really the perception that one person's gain would be another person's loss, or kind of think of it in the sense of your gain is my loss, or on the other side, corollary to that is your loss is my gain. And I don't think that's the way we should be thinking in agriculture. But if you look at how the digital world is playing out, if you look at how we start to talk about precision versus non-precision, organic versus conventional, it's kind of this one or the other, instead of looking at, okay, well, how do we actually make things better for the industry? How do we make things better for our businesses together and grow the entire pie? And that's really what I tend to think on a lot. And I know this gets into an area that I try to apply consistently. And this is Jim Collins' application of, the tyranny of the or versus the greatness of the and he talks about this in some of his business books, best-selling business books, Good to Great and Built to Last. But really talks about how we tend to think about things in the sense of, I can do this or I can do that, instead of trying to say, well, hey, how do we actually combine this? How do we do this and that and get a better outcome? And so I tend to think about that a lot. And one easy example there is from my friend Rob Syke, who I've read some of his material in the past, is what got me thinking about GMO organic. So we tend to think of it's GMO or organic. Whereas, he tends to apply this exact concept in the sense of saying, hey, you know what, in order to actually move things forward, it might be organic and it might be GMO together. And so I really like that train of thinking. I think that's valuable to apply in the digital space and in everything. And so did a little write up on that this week, and really just stems from, I was reading some mainstream ag media, I guess, this week, and just some of the framing was, to me, just probably poor. I would say, I won't single out who it was or which organization, but just I think it's negative to really frame things as this or that, or really trying to say and reinforce that, hey, you know what, this is bad because of this, without looking at the opposite side. And I get everybody's going to have an opinion and that sort of thing, but really that's just what got me thinking about that this week. And I think there's value in continually trying to apply this tyranny of, or the greatness of the and versus the tyranny of the or, and really thinking about things from, how do I grow the entire pie versus trying to just steal from somebody else's, so to speak. So that's one thing that I wrote this week. And finally, getting into Suspending Investor Disbelief, which was written by Matt Pryor. And he's an investor in Australia, has exited companies in the past too, but he's at Tenacious Ventures. And really, he had some really good writing this week. He's doing the 30 ship 30 for 30, so writing a new article every single day for 30 days, and he's written a lot of really good stuff here lately, and so I wanted to really zero in on this one that he focused in on this week, where he's talking about, if you're trying to raise money from venture capitalists, really what you're trying to do is get them bought into your vision. But what you're trying to do initially is really suspend their disbelief. So suspend the time between your presentation and them saying, hey, that's crazy, that doesn't make any sense, and really getting them to buy into the vision, your company, all those sorts of things. And so I highlighted a few things here, and then extrapolated it out a little bit into beyond the investor side of things. And so he says, all you're doing is suspending disbelief. And so this is a founder presenting to an investor. And so be specific about the future you're selling and how you can prove you're getting here. And so I really like that quote. I think that's great. And I think when he illustrates what you should do to do that, I think is an even better takeaway. And so he says, your job is to get prospective customers to show their belief through the commitment of resources. And so illustrating to the investor that, hey, your customers are actually changing the way they do things. And he gets into some examples here where, customers that share your vision can describe how the product will help them in specific ways, changes to other aspects of customers' business in anticipation of the product being available, and investment in significant infrastructure to maximize the benefit when the product is available. And so, to me, really, really great commentary in terms of how you can start to see if you're getting traction, but then how to convey that to an investor. And just where I tend to focus, I'm not a VC, not a founder of an organization, but love the agribusiness industry, of course. And so when I start to think about how can you take that and apply that in traditional agriculture, if you're a salesperson working for one of the large incumbent organizations, a retailer, those sorts of things, all of a sudden I think it can still be pretty valuable. And so when I start to look at this, I look at it through the frame of, traction begins with resource allocation. And so is there being resources allocated to your solution, to your tool? And so how can you amplify that traction is when there's fundamental changes to how an organization goes about their day. And so to me, this is where you can also increase switching costs, which is a value, and really creates a positive reinforcement. So through consistent usage, consistent value creation, and then ultimately you're going to be seeing them become reliant on this over time. And when you have that reliance, all of a sudden you know that you're in, that you have a strong solution, and there's going to be a really big pull from your product with those customers and probably others in the future. And I even read an interesting tweet here this week, and it was essentially like, if you want to know how valuable your system or your tool is to your customers, unplug the servers. And so obviously this is a digital example, but said unplug the servers and your customers will let you know, really just alluding to the fact that if you hear them screaming and kicking and yelling to get things back on, you know you have something that is really valuable. You know you have more than just a multivitamin. You have something that is, really a painkiller. You have something that is maybe even beyond that, getting into a religion where this is what I need to do. I need to be a part of this, and using this system every single day. And so when I start to think about that from a incumbent perspective, if you're somebody that's trying to sell seed treatment, that's very typical product to sell, of course, in traditional agriculture. Are your retailers investing in the assets to be able to apply that product to their seed that they sell? Are your farm customers investing in that seed treatment? And this is a very basic example, but I even go back to something along the lines of, say, impregnating fertilizer. So coating dry granular fertilizer with a micronutrient, with a biological, with a fungicide, something along those lines. Are the retailers investing in assets to be able to do that? And then what sort of training are they putting in place to be able to associate or enable that asset to be leveraged in a meaningful way? And so that's when you start to really know you're going to get traction, because once you have that sunk cost, all of a sudden there's going to be continued focus and there's going to be continued effort to focus in there. So anyways, I think great insights from Matt in this article, and I think it can really be used as a mental model or way of thinking for anybody in the ag industry, not just for founders looking to receive investment from VCs. And so really cool. And really with that covers the three topics I wanted to cover today in the video edition. Like I said, next week going to be trying to switch things up again. And as always, if you have any suggestions, love hearing from everybody about the good and the bad. Up to me, it's all about learning and trying to improve the way things work, and enabling you to consume information in a way that fits your needs and your desires. And so any comments, send them my way. Share Upstream if it works for you. I appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to talking with everybody again next week. Thanks.